up. Sorry about that. I didn't want to forget to record.
Sorry.
I just noticed I was getting really caught up in status and just a lot of surface crap. And so I was like, I need a break. And then we had my father-in-law kicked us off the farm. So we had to move within 3 months. And we had been at the farm for 11 years. And so we had to buy a house and move. And I wanted to make sure I was like settled and comfortable. But
Absolutely.
your video that you did on September 13th, what'd you call it? Are We All God? You said some bold stuff in there, and I was like, oh my God, I got to get him on and I got to talk about this now, because it was just this really inspiring idea that really helped catapult me into kind of stripping down all the layers. And so that is ultimately what I want to talk to you about first, Jack, is that video and Are We All God? Because at the end of that video, we'll get there, but you made a very bold proclamation, and I wasn't offended by it. I was like, someone else gets it. So do you remember that video? I mean,
I do, but I don't script any of it. So so you might have to like remind me of what I specifically said at the end.
I took notes.
Okay.
So,
awesome.
Because again, you just said a lot of really big statements that I think a lot of people are approaching. I think people are approaching that idea. And so in the beginning, you talk about how God is a noun. And I'm wondering if we can dig into just that concept alone. So you talk about a person, a place, a thing, and you're saying, how do we find God? How do you find God? So I'm wondering if we could just jump right into there.
Yeah.
And why is God a noun?
I feel like it's because we have this external perception of things. You know, I personally feel like we live in a material mind. You know, like you said, there's something emerging with people. And I think it's this concept of, I would just call it essence. And, you know, we just say spirituality in some sort of way, or mind, or, you know, something along those lines where you can't quantify it. It's intangible. And, but we just grew up for generations in this mindset of I'm only influenced by things I can feel with my senses, which is materialism. So then we say, I have to find happiness in having something, you know, acquiring something. So basically physically possessing something. And I just don't believe that. I personally believe that we have more of that frame of mind than we do this spiritual frame of mind. You know, even in magic, I see people have to, you know, they have to have all of their things that they have in order. And it's like, you get a little piece of this and you get a little piece of that, and you do it at this point in time and do it on this space. And it's all material. And all I want to say is, you realize all those things were they basically got the reputation for achieving that goal only because when that person first did it, they said, you know, someone asked them, how did you make it rain? You know, if it's out in the desert. And they said, well, you know, I had this stick, it made some noise because it had some beads in it or something like that. And I shook it around and then it started raining. And they say, okay, so we need a rain stick, you know, so something like that. And it's like, no, you don't need a stick. You need the essence of, we need some rain or we're going to starve, you know? So that's really what calls in the phenomenon, whatever you want to call it. That's what calls it in, is the essence, you know? So I just think people tend to say, what did you have around you when you had that essence? But they're just not looking at the essence. They're looking at the material things that are surrounding us.
Do you think people, sorry to just cut in real quick, but do you think people do that because they're trying to make things, for lack of a better word, scientific, something reproducible?
Yeah, so that would be like the masculine mind, you know? So the masculine mind is analytical. It's just, you know, how can I replicate something or even predict, you know, like their predictions are based on calculations and statistics. The feminine prediction is based on feeling, like intuition, you know, and you don't really, you know, if the masculine mind asks the feminine mind, how do you know that's going to happen? The feminine mind just says one thing: I don't know. You know, it's I don't have any basis. It's just a feeling or a premonition or, you know, intuition. So we have those two equal and opposites. The masculine needs to have every bit of evidence, otherwise, you know, it's false. And so of course, you know, you'd say, for that masculine mind, you'd say like, well, how much evidence is evidence? You know, like how much proof is proof? And they go, well, enough to have it make sense or seem reasonable enough. And I'm like, well, you're the only one really determining how much proof is proof. You know, how much evidence is going to make it factual. And that to me is a godly state. They're making a godly judgment of saying, you know, is if you give me this much evidence up to this point, I will determine whether or not it's true or false. That is a judgment. That is like a godly judgment. And so you can always ask him, why don't you need a little bit more evidence? Why don't you dig a little bit deeper? And they say, well, you know, we can't do it all, you know, we can't have all the information. So then I'm like, okay, so then at that point, you don't really know. And let's just say let's call it intuition at that point. It's expanded intuition, but we just have this flex between how much evidence the masculine mind needs and the feminine mind needs to judge something or to like observe something or make a prediction or estimation or a guesstimation. We're all doing the same thing. It's just the masculine mind tends to be a little bit more material and saying, I need to see these things in a place and I need to be able to repeat it. And then I'll make an estimation, you know, and it's qualified. It's a qualified estimation.
It's interesting that you point that out. I was reading something about psychedelic mysteries of the feminine and of femininity. And there was this idea introduced about the dynamic feminine. And it did counterplay on this idea that the masculine is more mathematical, is more logical, is more centrally focused on what I can observe. Whereas the dynamic feminine transcends beyond the material world, right? And so the feminine divinity rests outside of that which you can tangibly touch in a lot of cases. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that in, that kind of adds a little bit of weight to that idea about how we do see the masculine and the feminine. We're not seeing either of them as lacking anything, actually, but it's just, these are the strengths of each of the divinities. And what I notice about you, and this ties back into a lot of what you talk about, is you are focused on the feminine and masculine balance. And there is a significant imbalance of how we are really like embracing our energies of both the masculine and feminine. So I think it's really interesting that you kind of mentor towards that holistic approach of balance between feminine and masculine. What brought you to that understanding that it was that fundamental and
yes.
helped you create the kind of the methods and the lectures that you offer to help that?
That's a perfect question and insight, because I personally feel unsustainability is the biggest issue with any sort of system, right? That's the ultimate collapsation, is just that one word, sustainability, is what makes or breaks a system. And if our, let's just say even a relationship is a system, you know, like two people trying to make something work, even in just one person trying to make it work within themselves, that's a system of, you know, particular pillars of life, you know, health, wealth, love, you know, three main pillars. And then, you know, some other pillars branch out of that. And so that's a system within ourselves. And the way that system seems to work or function properly is through sustainability. And what is sustainability? It's balance. And so anytime that a system is unsustainable, it's imbalanced. It means, you know, like let's say recycling, for example, what makes that unsustainable? There's more consumption than there's recycling, you know, or let's say focusing on the output, you know, the cleanup afterward. So it's like unwrap all the stuff from plastic because it just gets us, you know, packaging and it gets us the thing. And then we open it up and our mind is so focused on getting the thing that all we do is we just toss the plastic. or the packaging. We just toss it and we say, I don't care where it's going, and then we keep doing that to where we care more about getting the thing, which is the introduction of it, and we care less about the departure of it, whatever it is, the packaging afterward, what happens at the end of it. So that's unsustainable. And so the same goes, with our minds. Yeah, I think that these things are constructed by our minds. So like these systems are constructed by our minds. Yeah, see that fly. But basically that's the main premise for these sort of concepts that I talk about, because I don't really like pain. I don't really like seeing tension. I don't like experiencing tension. I don't feel like it does good things in the world. I know that we work off tension, certain levels of tension, but it seems to cause other issues that people just assume are life. They just say that's just a part of life. You got to deal with it. And in my opinion, I was just like, why do I have to just deal with it? Because I was very spiritual, not in the sense of what most people would call spirituality. I was very fascinated with the concept of spirituality, that people were saying that's a real thing. And obviously religion was the thing to kind of address that. And I had questions as a kid and they couldn't answer them. And I'm just like, so why are you telling me it's true? Like, why are you telling me for a fact this is what it is? And you can't tell me, how it's true, other than this other person told you that. And you said, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to tell someone else that. And so I was always fascinated with spirituality in that sense. So I just wanted to know, like where does all this stuff come from? And so I just wanted to find this sense of sustainability, and that meant balance, and that meant trying to perceive things from a different state of mind, like what we consider life to be as it is, that's just a part of life. If I can imagine something different than that, then where does that come in, and then they can tell me that's my imagination and it's unrealistic or something like that. And I'm like, but then that's how all things came to this place right now, is that someone imagined I could do it differently. And so then, I'm just like, so why can't I imagine it another way? And so I just kept doing that with every little thing. I just kept asking myself, is there another way to view this thing? And it's crazy how far it can go with all these different things in the world. And yeah, so that's pretty much a nutshell of how it all came to be, like this kind of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm taken back to just the childhood questions that I had too. And like all children were like, why? Why? I want more information as to that. Okay. You tell me that. Why?
Yeah.
And we really evolve out of that curiosity when we start growing up and maturing. It's like asking questions is no longer acceptable. And I remember, I don't know if it was within the video or maybe just something that you had posted, but to the effect that asking questions angers people. And my initial response to that statement was, yeah, why? Because I struggle with that, right? Like if my husband asks me a question, I'm like, what? Why are you asking me a question? But a lot of it too is that's my biggest complaint is people are afraid to ask questions, right? We get to this point where asking questions is offensive because you must not believe me. Well, I want to believe you. So I need more information to get there so that I can have this understanding of where you're coming from, right? Because we think that we should be able to just make a blanket statement and not back it up. Well, then that I would take back to the biblical teachings I've been given. Well, it says within the verses that like, if we believe in something, we should have a reason as to why we believe it and not be afraid to state it, right? But we're in cancel culture, so no one really wants to talk about what they actually believe. And we lean more towards this civilization of agreeableness, right? And because to be seen as disagreeable is to be seen as, not civil and not humanitarian and not considerate and not empathetic. But you talked about this idea that when we become angry when we're asked questions, it was either because we were hiding a truth or hiding a lie or protecting a truth. And I just thought that was a really interesting concept. Maybe we could jump into that. And this idea is like you had these And now these aren't the only options for why a person becomes angry, but they're quite common, is we're hiding a lie. And in a lot of regards, what are we hiding? Our ignorance because we don't know?
Oh yeah, totally. I do feel we distort things. I feel like that distortion is usually serving our own, agenda. It's like what I want out of things. That's why I'm going to skew it. Hey, do you want to go to the farmer's market? It's just right down the road. It's actually 30 minutes away. So I'm skewing it so I can get, let's say, communion with this person. And that's something as simple as going to the farmer's market on a Sunday or something like that. So, and people would just say like, oh, well, I didn't know it was that far away. It's like, no, you had Google Maps. Like right now, there's so many different ways to actually, get to a truth. And thankfully for technology and the internet, that's actually that allowed me to see all these different perspectives to where I go, no one really knows. I'm just actually not going to assume anyone knows what it is they're talking about. They're only knowing what they're focused on. And sure, we could say professionals are very focused on it, but I'm like, yeah, but the more focused we get on one thing, the less we see of these other things. So it's hard, and then if you see more of the other things, you can't dive deep into one thing and be a specialist. So that's the duality. So the universe is constructed in paradoxes, right? Everything's a paradox. So the more you focus on one thing, you get really good at it, but you miss out on all these other things. And so then you don't really know the actual connection between them. It gets difficult to try and piece things together, make bridges. But then if we do make bridges, they're not so deep, they're not so complex. And so then we say, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about. You only know it at surface level. But a lot of different things, but only at surface level. So that's the duality. And so, yeah, generally, I feel like we swim in and out, of these particular mentalities. And so when we question someone that's a specialist, they would get angry because they're like, you don't think I know what I'm talking about.
And I just want to jump in. There was someone on the mainstream media that recently made a statement that basically said questioning me is questioning science. And
Yes.
that is that problematic area that we've fallen into, where if they're an expert, we dare not question them. And I think that creates so much more conflict for us to be able to engage in conversations going outward. But so I just wanted to throw that in because
Totally.
it's like on the precipice of what we're experiencing right now collectively.
Yes. And like this year, the 2020, I feel like was the conclusion to the 2012 apocalypse. So I feel like that was the segment right there. It set the stage for people riding the 2012 apocalypse. And then the 2020 was kind of the culmination of it, because everyone that I know that was on the 2012 apocalypse, like within this chunk, they're the ones, let's say, speaking against the agenda of this 2020, stuff. I don't know if you're for or against it or in the middle or just like, yeah, it's all inexperience, let's just lump it all together. But it's really radically changing. It doesn't matter if we're for or against it. It's still radically changing our consciousness because of all these different variables. For the conspiracy theorists that, they're like, yeah, all my research it's coming true. It's literally unfolding right in front of our eyes. Other people are like, yeah, I wasn't into conspiracy theory, but now I'm realizing there's a lot of corruption. And thank God, or thank source for this sort of social media platform so we can share this information like wildfire. Like literally they walk out of the courtroom and there are some posts, talking about it. We don't have to wait, months and months or years like back in the day before the internet. We had to wait for like them to publish a book like 2 years later. We're 2 years outdated. Right now, they're literally walking out of the courtroom and we have access to that information. It's, so crazy what this time or this age has really done for our awareness in terms of what is true or false. It's also screwed it up quite a bit because we have one side saying that this is all true and saying that the opposite side is all false. And then that opposite side is saying their side is all true and the other side is all false. And, you know, it doesn't matter what the subject is, we're going to find this kind of true and false on both sides. And when I have anything dualistic and I go, it could be this, it could be that, the only thing I know how to do at that point is just go, well, eventually they're going to wiggle around each other and then they come together as one, right in the center. And so
Yeah.
so it's the hard part is that some of these things are so far out that it's really hard for us to even hold just one up, you know, and now we got to hold two, and then we got to smash them together into our center. So I mean, I think this is just another global mechanism for this kind of, you know, conscious expansion of consciousness. And so yeah, it's really interesting. You know, it's turning people into conspiracy theorists because they're questioning, you know, they're questioning the leaders, the authorities, they're questioning doctors or science, and seeing, you know, how much money is being fed into these mainstream doctors and how they're invested in all these other, you know, pharma companies and connected with these other politicians, and it just keeps going. And it's like, wow, so things are woven together much differently than I thought, and it's waking people up in some way or another. And even if they're not into any of that, they legit believe it's all an accident, we're just doing the best we can, they're still getting rocked in their love life because now they're both at home working from home, and they're like, I didn't know who you were more than 1 hour per day, you know, I was working most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, and so then it turns into an emotional awakening, you know. So there are people that don't need to get into conspiracy theory. It's just I have to live with my partner now 24/7, and I've never had to do that for more than a week, you know, on vacation, and we weren't working. There wasn't, you know, those conditions, and we could drink every day, and you know, like that, all those little things seem to hold together the relationship or lack thereof. And then now they're realizing, now they're home together, there's no vacation, they're not drinking because they got to show up, you know, work the next day, and they're at home. And so they're
Yeah.
like, wow, I really, and now I'm seeing more of you, and I didn't realize how different we were. And so then it really changes or shifts the bond between the two people. I would just say surfaces it. And so yeah, people are questioning love. And so that's an awakening in this. It's really awakening, you know, finance. It's awakening, you know, is my business under collapse? You know, how do
Yeah.
I turn digital or something like that? How do I work from home? Because who knows? They keep shutting it down, opening it up, shutting it down, opening it up. And so then it's like people need to learn how to pivot with that. So we got information being a conscious evolution with this 2020. We got love, we got finance. Those are the three main pillars, in my opinion. Health, or sorry, so health would be another one. You know, like you're
Yeah.
not exercising.
Yeah, so not only are we experiencing this kind of political revelation, we're having a social revelation, but then you go back home, you got this emotional revelation going on. But then around it all is this new awakening to what is health? How do I keep myself healthy? And does everyone else really want to keep me healthy? Or coming into this financial awakening, right? Realizing how the game is rigged and who's always going to benefit no matter how hard I try. I mean, there's so many revelations coming. I feel like everyone is going through like a big explosive erotic epiphany because they are being inundated from every dimension of life. And now it's like, let's integrate it because you know it's out of whack, it's imbalanced. And so we have to integrate it. And so I think that just kind of speaks to the overall narrative of the global awakening, right? And then how
Yeah.
do we work through it? What methods do we use? How do we keep our sanity so we can keep everything in balance? And that's kind of what you actually do directly with people. So right, you're a mentor,
Yeah.
you're a coach, and you're trying to help people like kind of formulate these balances within their life.
Totally. I mean, and I can't say I specialize in one particular let's say, avenue or pillar, because I'm not like a, an extra special, financial analysis or financial analyst. I'm not like a love doctor or guru or anything like that. I really like seeing them all together, and that's it. And I just want to see how everything fits together. So some people have, everyone has something more so to look at, and so they have other things in check. So great, they go to that specialist. That's just like if it's their marriage, they go to a marriage counselor because their work is all right. It's steady, it's consistent. They know if they lose it, they have other options. So they don't have to worry about work. Great. Their finances, they have plenty of money saved up in the bank account. So they don't need an analyst, or an advisor. Health, maybe they exercise. So it's great. So all those other things are in check. They don't need to look at those other things. So where I really like to help people with is trying to work on that. If it is just one part, or let's say it's one, or maybe even all three pillars. So far, I haven't really helped anyone with all three pillars in one moment. It's usually one of the three pillars. But generally speaking, what I do is I look at whatever seems to be imbalanced, or let's say broken or fractured or distorted. And then we work on that, obviously to the best of my ability, because I'm not a specialist in any of these things. I'm a passionist. I'm very passionate. And so then what I really like doing is saying, okay, now once we shift that one thing, all the other things will shift too. So it's like a spider web. If you have a spider web and you push on one part of that spider web, all the other branches converge with that shift. It's not like you can push on one part of life and expect everything else in that web to be totally stationary, to be totally stagnant, exactly how it is. So as we push on one part of our lives, the other parts will actually merge and usually converge toward that pressure point that that we're working on. So relieving that pressure, all the other points seem to balance out, and now it's a nice little circle. The web is a nice little circle. So that's generally how I help people. Is there's a part in life, if it's health, wealth, or love, generally speaking, we just try to exercise and massage that part. What is the frame of consciousness, frame of mind that is constructing it. So I like looking at consciousness as codes, or like software. And so we're basically diving into the codes. What have we programmed, and how do we reprogram it? In my approach to it, I try to simplify it. There are specialists that go really deep into that kind of coding. But if I simplify it, it allows us to see more of the key, or like the mechanism for decoding. And then as, let's say that person, if they're working with that one part of their life, if they see that coding, that key to the codes, then they can also start seeing how they're shifting the other parts of their life. So they can use that same key and kind of tweak all of the other nodes of their reality and their consciousness, because it's all the same thing. And so I try to teach a little bit of that at the same time. So eventually I'll be making a course here, hopefully this year, that teaches that key, because I believe there's this one fundamental key, or like understanding of the cosmos, that allows us to balance out anything that we're going through. It's almost like universal. And let's just call it energy, but it's really understanding what is energy as a frame of mind and as a frame of matter, or reality. And then understanding those two things, it's like we can basically do this with anything in our lives. And so it's give someone a fish, they eat for a day. Teach someone how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. So it's just how do we teach someone how to fish, and how to make a fishing pole, and maybe even make a different kind of fishing pole, because you have different kinds of fish you're trying to catch. So some poles are thicker and longer, some are thinner and shorter, different baits, different hooks. So there are all these little styles, but it's still called fishing. So in terms of like understanding or, you know, becoming aware of our minds, it's still, we all have a mind and they all seem to function in the same singular way, but we have all these variations that make it so colorful and seem so different. And I stripped away all of those things. And I found out what is this key mechanism of consciousness in terms of, you know, not just understanding what is consciousness, but how to move it. And yeah, it's just done wonders in my understanding. I was a very misunderstanding person. I never understood people, and I had a lot of problem trying to just interact with people because I was so stuck in my own mind. I had no idea how other people's minds work. And the more I dove into other people's minds in accordance with my own mind, I started seeing all these principles and ended up seeing a common thread or theme throughout them. And then I go, wow, it's like this is in everyone's mind, or maybe it is everyone's mind. And now we're just experiencing that key or that mechanism in all of our own unique journeys. And that's it. And so that's why I talk about so many different things, because we're all experiencing generally the same thing through our own unique journeys. And we all understand this, you know, from here at some depth. We all understand we all have a unique life and everything, but it gets hard to understand someone else's unique life, and, you know, because it gets so far out or so far fetched, or, you know, whatever we perceive to be wrong or unethical. And it's like, I've done this with so many things to where I can basically talk about any mindset as a state of God, you know, so looping that back to the original, to the point where I was just like, I think we're all God at this point. And I feel like we're all just experiencing a version of infinity as a finite human, and saying, what does infinity feel like as this finite body that is Jack or that is Danielle? And so we're experiencing that finite journey, and then it kind of overlaps with people, you know, in conversation or
Yeah.
physically.
I
Yeah.
That resonates deeply with me. That's kind of like the evolution that I've kind of made and witnessing. And in picking up on your last point about, you know, how people always feel like they're misunderstanding other people, do you think a lot of that comes from this collectivized ideology that is like so important? I sometimes feel like I get overwhelmed with collectivism and community and concern for people that are outside of my proximity, to a point where what happens then is we are okay with these generalizations and seeing us all as one, but then we separate all of these different collectives on top of it. And then we're like, I don't understand why you don't fit in this box. And it's like, well, because we forgot about the individual experience. Like, we are literally, each body is a diverse environment that is so different than everybody else. But at the same point, yes, it is the same, because we all have the same rules and hardware programs for how an individual body operates. But when we collectivize everything so much, we forget about the uniqueness. And then
Yeah.
when someone reflects something back to us, we don't know how to handle it. And I think that helps add to that conflict. But I'm just wondering if you see that too. This collectivized mentality really, I believe, contributes to the separation. And, you know, what have we done with God as well? We've separated God, right? God is this superior being and we are not worthy. But then you're going, but I am God. So are you. And so how does someone reconcile that after being taught for decades, you are separate, you are beneath, you are not this, you are not that, you fit into this box? So what do you,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I do feel, you know, going back to sustainability, duality and everything. So the duality is community versus individual. I can only assume what you were saying right there.
I'm gonna kill you, fly.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
It got trapped in my office with me, I guess.
He was like, I want in on this. So I feel the duality is community and individualism. So we all know that we're individuals and we all know that we're part of a community. It's just, where is the priority? And so the priority is collective consciousness, you know, groupthink, herd mentality. And so people just look at their neighbor and say, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. So if I look at my neighbor, they're going to inform me because, you know, I'm closest to my neighbor, and whoever's closest in proximity, that means we're divinely connected. That's all subconscious. That's how I believe it's herd mentality is working, but it's all a subconscious understanding. So generally people just go, you know, all those things that I just said, all those things are floating in the background, and they just go, okay, I'm going to do that, you know. But that's why, in my opinion, is because we have this collectivism of, I'm a part of a culture, I need to follow the rules, and if I don't follow the rules, everyone else is going to hate me, and I'm going to be ostracized from the community, and I want to be a part of the community, I don't want to be left out. So, you know, we want to be around people. And so all of those things float in the background, in the subconscious. And that's why we look to our neighbor, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. Like, you know, if the neighbor starts looking up in the sky and screaming and stuff, I'm probably going to look up at the sky, man. I scream immediately, but I'm going to be like, what are you doing? You know, that you're doing something. And, you know, surfing, I surf out, you know, like 1 block from the beach. And if people aren't surfing in this one spot, I'm going to assume that there's something about that spot, maybe a shallow reef or something, you know, or whatever it may be. Maybe it's just bad waves or something, and I just don't realize it. So I just subconsciously go over to the group because they must know something that I don't know. But it doesn't mean that's always the right answer, which is generally what people lean toward, is saying, if I'm going to do something different than the herd, that must mean they know something I don't. But we lose sight of this other perspective, which is maybe they don't fucking know, you know, and maybe there's a better swell coming, you know, on this side. And I don't know either. I'm just guessing, you know, I just have an instinct. And so then you see the one person go in the other direction by themselves. And then of course the group points at them, and then they go, look at this guy. He has no idea, you know, what he's doing. And it's like, yeah, there's a gamble, just like any sort of prominent figure in history. What did they do? They went against the grain. They broke the rules. They did all the things that the authorities are telling us not to do. And it just breeds following mentality, the follow mentality. And same with religion. It just breeds follow mentality. Follow me because I know better than you.
And the irony of that, the follow me mentality, is how many, just speaking on Christianity, how many followers did Jesus have? A dozen. And one of them sold his ass out. So, you know, and I just wanted to throw that in because I remind myself of that when like I said earlier, I get stuck in that status and in thinking about, oh, nobody's listening to me because I don't have the likes and I don't have the followers. But I have to go back and remind myself, either to Jesus, Danielle, like, what did you expect when you speak a different kind of truth that isn't so agreeable and isn't with status quo and isn't what everybody else is agreeing with? Then you do stand out. But sometimes that gamble and that risk will lead you to be a revolutionary ultimately. So,
or in the loony bin. So, I mean, it goes,
that too, obviously.
And you know, like, let's say this is a really odd example and people don't like it when I use this one, but I think Charlie Manson was right.
Oh,
I know. And so basically the reason why I'm saying that is because he was talking about, let's just say these very concepts, you know, authority controlling us and mind control, and even going out into ETs and other dimensions. And I'm like, I'm totally on board for all of that stuff. But the thing is that he didn't know how to integrate that, let's say, in a more balanced or composed manner. So he ended up going psychotic. And it turned into Follow Me, which is kind of the same program. Follow me, you know, go to the other side. So then he made some Kool-Aid and they drank it, you know. And so he didn't know how to really blend them together to where it's like, yeah, you can venture out, but don't lose yourself. That's the hard part. So people don't want to venture out because they'll lose themselves, which is why psychedelics aren't really good for people that are in the following mentality. Usually people that gravitate towards psychedelics where their mind is just totally blown are the people that are already kind of breaking the mold in some sort of way.
Yeah,
because
that was me. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So people that hate psychedelics, what do you know, the biggest fear that they have is that they'll end up seeing themselves, and they'll be like, this is how different I am, and I can't just rely on what my neighbor is doing anymore. I'm now tapping deeper into my, let's say, my essence and my uniqueness, you know, my individuality, and then seeing that with the rest of the world that I claim I know. And it's like, yeah, I'm really going to be different at this point. I can't just follow the script anymore. And
You
that's
can't
the,
lie to yourself anymore.
yeah,
You like physically cannot lie to yourself anymore. I mean, that is
yeah.
one of the things. I have been using psychedelics for almost a year now. That is the one
Sweet.
thing I cannot lie to myself, and I cannot lie to the people I love. I just, lying has, and so if you can't lie to yourself anymore, you can't convince yourself that you're happy about something or satisfied about something that is convenient and keeps you comfortable.
And
Because
suppressed it with other mechanisms.
right. You just can't. You can't lie to yourself. And I think people like to lie to themselves.
Yeah. And I would say on a subconscious level, they're comfortable in ignorance. And let's just say we're comfortable. I would lump myself. It's not like I see everything. So I feel like, you know, we all have this kind of consciousness, or lack of, you know, like maybe even call it subconsciousness, and fear of moving to the next level. And yeah, and it's for this reason. So I try not to bash people. You know, I used to bash them all the time because they couldn't see the things that I could see, but I didn't
Yep, me
realize,
too.
like, yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think it's a natural part of evolving, especially if we evolve in rapid bursts, because we didn't chip away at it, you know. Like, so if I kept smoking weed on a regular basis, or used psychedelics that induced those states of consciousness, they didn't happen because of me. They happened because I consumed something and I withstood the waves. That's basically psychedelics, is someone basically dumping us into a storm out in the middle of the ocean, and then saying, I survived it, but I didn't swim out to the ocean and then survived the storms and then swam back. And so I feel like, you know, some sort of sober evolution is kind of like, yeah, I don't have a boat to just, or a helicopter just fly me out there and drop me into the big waves. And then they pull me back out as soon as I'm done. I go, I'm done. I'm done at the end of the night. You know, I'm good. Because that's what psychedelics can do for us, is we take a pill, or we take a substance, or, you know, a plant or a root, and then we just consume it. All we had to do was pay some money, know the right people, and pay some money. And we might not be ready for that because we didn't swim out there. And so it might really rock our world. And other people, yeah, they do some prep. Maybe it takes them like 2 years to do ayahuasca or something like that. And so they're really, you know, even just prepping themselves for it. And then there are other people that have those experiences sober. You know, they chip away at it, yeah, and then they have that far out experience, and now they're living in it because they don't need to consume the other things. So it's, you know, we're all experiencing it in some sort of level, but I feel like when it's induced and we're really not intentional when we're introduced to it, it really can rock us, and we also might feel we know more than what we really do. And so then people will start looking down, you know, have this spiritual ego of, I'm now ascended because I saw through the veil, or something like that. And
I can, I just wanted to jump in there too.
for
Is
sure.
That's totally what I see too. There are all these different ways in which people can escalate their evolution. They don't need to use psychedelics, right? My husband won't ever. He just, what's really extraordinary about my husband is the experiences I have either on psychedelics or cannabis. I can talk them out with him, and he's already got something to compare that to, right? Something he's already experienced. He sees the resonance in it, and he's already felt that. And I think, okay, yeah. And I've said this before too. And Sam Harris has spoken about it too. He's like, some people don't need psychedelics, but the rest of us do, right? And I'm like, yes, I do. I'm one of those people. But you're right. if you're not intentional with your use, if you don't go into it with some form of intention, for like, for me, I go very specific. I'll say, I want to release something tonight. I know I have this feeling something is clogged. I can't identify it. I want to be shown what it is and how I can release it. Right. And sometimes it's just like, I need to widen my awareness lens on myself. Right. But you do have to have an intention. And I know a lot of younger people, and I'm not knocking on young people, but I know a lot of younger people who just use it as like a
A time
habitual
filler.
Friday night. And I'm
Yeah.
like, right, to fill time, to clean their houses. No joke. I know someone who uses LSD to clean his house. And I'm like, you're, no. But we do want to be mindful. And a lot of people can experience that kind of transcendent divinity outside of the scope of psychedelics. Like, for a lot of people who are scared of psychedelics, I would say, if you've never smoked cannabis, try that too, right? This is my recommendation. But to, I think we're all in that period. I know a lot of people are, where I need something to help me break through what I'm feeling right now, right? Because we are overstimulated. We are told that productivity is meaning, and we're in a situation where we can't really do either of those things. We can't be stimulated all the time. We have to like stay home. We have to be scared. We might have to mask up in whatever state we're in, if we're in the US. And then productive, how can it be productive? Like the economy is not being productive right now. Like, we have scares and scarcity threats, right? And so people are looking for that. But I would also say, have you tried a conversation with someone who's willing to hear you and hold space for you?
Mm.
Because while a psychedelic experience is amazing, and I do love them, you can get that same high from just sitting in front of someone and going, are you really hearing me right now? Like, I feel heard. You're
Mm.
seeing me right now. Like, that is a high in itself, right? And that is the connection high that we get when we are willing to reveal ourselves and be vulnerable and in an intimate proximity with somebody else. And maybe incorporating touch, because I always say that physicality is very important, and it doesn't have to always be sexual, right? Touching
Yeah.
people. So what I would say is, like, if you're thinking about psychedelics or anything like that, I would say start with a conversation. Just start with a really connected conversation and see how much divinity like develops just out of that.
That's beautiful. I
Thank you.
freaking love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of, I would say what helped me was just, I never did psychedelics until about a year ago, aside from cannabis. Like, I would smoke, but I wouldn't treat it so divinely. I'd basically, I was halfway through it's Friday night or something like that, but I would stay in and I would journal, or I would learn something, like far out that I couldn't learn, let's say sober, or like when my mind is like stressed.
Like, sit on YouTube and watch videos and stuff and just be like, whoa, I didn't even know.
Just absorb. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I liked that, and it really enhanced that, because I would, it'd really give me focus and I wouldn't see the rest of the world. So I didn't actually like hanging out with people, because it was more stressful than being sober, at that point. So I was kind of like in the middle. I would use it for a reason. I knew that it would enhance certain things, but I didn't quite look at it on an emotional level. Like, like I was clearing something, like you said, something's clogged. Now I look at it a little bit more that way, because of my first time having a trip or a journey, which was about a year ago. And yeah, and I did mushrooms, and that's when, and I wasn't prepared. I did it. Um, I did it all bad. I did it all wrong. So let's just put it that way. And I paid the price. And I had to go through what I thought was a really difficult ego death. And so yeah, it really gave me more respect for just consuming or being part of something that's going to shift my consciousness, and that includes people. So, having a conscious conversation, it's, to me, it can be like a trip or a journey. We're going through the mind of someone, and we're seeing things that we didn't see before. And I naturally did that, but I didn't know how to respect it in that way. It was just, yeah, it was still disconnected. Um, and so yeah, I mean, just being open to someone else's mind is pretty much like being open to a plant medicine. because that's the consciousness of plant medicine, and it's really interacting with our minds, and it really can trip us out. Just like hearing someone's trauma and their experience, that can really trip us out to the point where most people go, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to know that. And that's basically us saying, I'm not ready to see that. I'm not ready to see that in the world. And sure, it's not geometric shapes and like colorful, unicorns and stuff floating around, and all the stuff that we might not be ready to see because it can feel so real in that sense. Same with, sitting down with someone, having a cup of coffee, and then they tell us about some really horrible stuff that happened as a child. And we're just like, I'm not ready for that. And so they might be ready, just don't go to a coffee shop, at 1 p.m. and expect it to all be all right, So it's like those sort of things. And like your husband, saying, I don't need psychedelics. I believe that to be true. Some people think you can only find God through psychedelics. And just like everyone's God, everything is a church. It doesn't matter what it is. If that's the thing, person, place, or thing that gets you into that state of mind or that essence, then that is God. That is God for you. That is God for me. That is God for whatever gets us in touch. And that's it. And it might be having children, because there's a moving through that on a daily basis. People are just like, yeah, this really showed me what God is, having a child. And same with, building a business. Let's say it's an international business. It's like, yeah, this really woke me up. A near-death experience. It really woke me up to what is life and, how to cherish it each day. And psychedelics, that really woke me up. So everyone gets awoken through some sort of mechanism. And it doesn't have to be, a chemical, let's say, but there are people that when they get awoken in a certain way, like, let's say people that they got awoken through having children. What are they going to say whenever someone's having a hard time? You should have kids. That will really show you, will really show you what life is all about.
Because if it worked for me, it might work for you.
Exactly. Yeah. It transformed me in such a different way. Or like, someone saying I'm having trouble, like I'm finding my direction. They're like, start a business. Yeah. And it's like, just like having kids, you don't just tell someone to have a kid, it's neglecting all the other aspects of it, of who's my partner, what do they have going on in them. We're making one person based on both of us. I'm unifying with them. I'm not just using them as a kid. Same with business. You don't just start a business just like, I'm bored, I'll just start a business. You should want to sell the product. You should want to be a part of it. It's going to be a very intimate thing. It's a day in and day out type experience and journey. Same with health. It's like none of those things are just so casual if it's going to be life-changing or transformational. So of course, like those people aren't really coaches in that sense. Like they're not, someone saying you should have kids, they're not going to be like a parental coach or something like that. Yeah. And just like toss that in there and just, and so yeah, there are all these other things that come with it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work, so it can still be a legitimate thing, but we just have to feel a calling for it. If we're kind of in this sea and we're floating around and we don't really know which way is up or down, but we feel we need something, that's kind of like that's a state where we're looking for this new essence or this new depth of God, source, creator, 0 point, whatever you want to call it. And we just don't know exactly where it is, because we had this point where we thought it was somewhere. Let's say it's someone that was in the church and they thought they could only experience God at a church or around other Christians. And then they're like, but I'm waking up to realizing the other religions might not be wrong. And so what that's doing is it's releasing the borders and the shackles of their current religion. And then they're awakening to something bigger. And they're like, and I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to integrate other religions into this one that I've proclaimed to be a part of, And so now I'm floating in a sea of ambiguity, and I don't know what this is. I don't know which way is up anymore. What is right and what is wrong? just because it's opposing me doesn't mean it's wrong anymore. And that's really weird. That's a weird feeling, but in my opinion, that's getting closer and closer to infinity. The more that we realize right can be wrong and wrong can be right, and it's just a matter of perception, let's just say subjectivity, let's just say consciousness, then at that point, we're like, wow, I'm really going to be showing up to people much differently. It really rocks it,
And this is going to be our perfect segue into the bold proclamation you made at the end of that video, I think. So you talked about how everything kind of comes back to an infinity. And that video that I had brought up, you kind of talk about how once we start to recognize that God is everything, that brings us to acknowledging that this idea of Satan is also God.
Yes.
And so speak on that, because like I said, I'm with you. Like, I've come to that epiphany. I have come to go, if God has created the entire universe, if that's the narrative that I'm accepting, and God is all powerful, and God is all loving, and God is graceful and all forgiving, God created everything. That does include this entity that we call Satan, or this character of the devil. And so again, I've had other people on the show who have also espoused the same ideas, and I'm like, yes, let's talk about it. So I'm just wondering, like,
Awesome.
bring that to us all for other people to consider that Satan is God.
Yes. This isn't a popular one. Usually by people that are still in the Christian paradigm, because when we're in an arena, we only see the game inside the arena. We're not looking outside of the arena. We're not looking at the parking lot. We're not looking at, the restaurants, and we're not looking at other arenas in other sports outside of that one. So generally speaking, like, people, spectators especially, are looking at the two teams, and they're pushing and pulling, which means they're playing a game with each other. It doesn't mean the whole universe is that game. It just feels like the whole universe is that game, because our attention is so focused on this, who's going to win, who's going to lose. And so we miss out on walking outside of that arena. Once the game's over, time's up, game's over, what happens to everyone? They go, whoa, okay, now I'm going to walk out into the car, and I'm going to listen to the radio, and I'm going to do something other than this. So it's almost like we're sucked into it, just like a movie. We're sucked into the movie all the way up till the credits start rolling, and then we just kind of look around, and it's just like, what a journey, like, what a trip. But it was just a movie, it was just a sport, it was just a game. So when I look at, let's say God versus Satan, that sounds like a game to me, pushing and pulling. And if God can't just snap his fingers and be done with this person, then it's not the infinite God that's creating all things, that's literally making physics that we just have no clue. We think the smartest people on the planet are so smart, and they're just discovering the physics that, let's say, God made, so complex. And there's probably way more out there that is just going to blow our minds. And this is all God. So I'm like, maybe the Christian paradigm in particular, or any paradigm where it has two people fighting or battling or opposing each other, that's a game, and that's a dynamic, and that's energy. And so I would call it a limited arena. Just like, you have kids, who's the real parent of your kids? And then you might say it's you might say it's your husband, your husband might say it's you, and vice versa. They'll say, without me, you wouldn't have this child,
Yeah.
And so you would have to say it's both. You can't try and explain a child without including both parents. And it doesn't matter, even if it's artificial insemination, there's still another counterpart. There's always going to be another counterpart to this experience, because it's always going to be two coming together to become one. And so in my opinion, the way Christians describe this battle between God and Satan it just sounds very human. It just sounds like it's not the infinite God that is literally all encompassing and all things possible. And sure, there's another way to explain Satan, and they say, he's a mechanism to test people to really find God, because he's tempting us with lustful desires. And so then they say that's its purpose, is to basically teach us how to suppress our desires. And if we give into the desires, then we're on his side. And so then it still shifts into a side, my side or your side. So I just like, it's just a person embodying an aspect of God more potently than what our consciousness can entertain as being a reality. But once we expand our consciousness beyond that arena, we go, yeah, that's just a version of darkness. Just like yeah. God is like a version of goodness or light.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not all light and it's not all dark. It's both. You can't have darkness without light, and the only thing that's in between them is you're the one separating light from dark. And people forget you're the thing separating the two. Light, the only way light, we know that there is such a thing as light, is because of darkness. If everything is illuminated the same, then it's all one color, and you can't see anything. You actually won't even know where you are, because there's no depth. There's no dynamics, so you don't know what dimension you're actually in. So people talk about 5D in that way, where there's no darkness, and I go, maybe that's just a projection that you don't like darkness. You don't know how to hug a demon, let's say. You don't.
Ooh, you don't know how to hug a demon. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I
hug my little demons every night before bed, tuck them in, tell them I love them. No.
Yeah. Aren't you cute? Yeah. I mean, there's some horrible things out there for sure. And I'm happy and grateful that I didn't go that deep into them. Like, I didn't have to experience it like other people, or, let's just say yet, if it is around the corner, I don't know. But ultimately, that's what I personally believe, is that all of these dark things in the world seem to teach us something. And it's not necessarily how to avoid darkness. That's one stage of it. That's like the second stage. The first stage is just reacting to it and just saying, this is how painful it is. Then the next is, how do I avoid all of those things? Like, how do I avoid the things that are painful? And then the next after that is like, well, now I'm avoiding almost everything in the world, because everything can kill me. Even water. I have too much water, I can die. I have too little water, I die. I have too much water, I die. I have too much oxygen, I die. I have too little oxygen, I die.
So we need a balance.
Yeah. Yes. And so in God versus Satan, we need a balance. And so then when I started scaling my mind beyond the borders of what I thought was evil and what I thought was, God or, goodness and all of that, I go, wow, it's actually going to be both of them together. Like, just like man and woman. If I want to make a child and evolve the paradigm or the generation, the lineage, then I need to have both of them working together. And obviously, I'm not going to make a child based on the suppression of one.
Yeah.
So like, if I'm the man, I'm not going to suppress the feminine and say, I'm impregnating you. That's, let's say, creating a block or an imbalance, just like God saying, I'm trying to defeat you, Satan, and Satan saying the same, I'm trying to defeat you, God. And that's like a man saying, I'm trying to possess you, and the woman saying to the man, I'm trying to possess you. And it's a break. It's almost a competition, but that they find themselves always interacting, but they're competing with each other. And I go, what if we made a baby based on like, I actually really love you. I really love all the parts about you. I want your mind mixed with my mind, blended together, and see what mind we create, one single mind we create out of that. And help raise them, in our particular values that are aligned. Like, what if we found that sexually attractive, like that aspect, rather than
is that on your list, or is zeros in the bank account on your list? Yeah,
exactly. And just getting off, like, how many people accidentally have a baby just because, they're like, yeah,
I've accidentally had a couple babies. So
yeah. And I appreciate you opening up with that, because it's like, I'm only saying this in theory. You know, I don't have kids. I'm not married. I'm very far away from marriage, and I don't have like a career. I don't have, you know, like a professional career where I go into an office and I'm getting paid by someone else, and I don't have this whole lifestyle that most other people have. So a lot of the stuff I talk about is really observation, and I'm
Yeah,
getting
that's why I
tastes.
asked you if you were ever married or if you were currently in a relationship, because the scope of your just your advice was on such an inspiring level that I'm like, I don't know if I've ever heard him say he was married or anything, but it's just extraordinary to have that come out. You haven't been married, correct, ever. And so a lot of people are jaded, right? They're not speaking in this hopeful, optimistic way about relationships. They are tarnished by them, jaded by them, hurt by them, upset by them. And so a lot of people who are not, it was just surprising to me to see someone not in a relationship engage the erotic components of a relationship so in depth. So I was like really inspired by it because I'm like, you don't hear this from a lot of single people. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. This guy knows what he's talking about. And it was just kind of, it was kind of breathtaking for me. I was like, he doesn't seem like he has been bruised by it so brutally that he has these biases. Everything is just so open and nuanced, but all in respect to balance of feminine and masculine. So I just want to give
Totally.
you a little hat tip to that, and that I
Well,
appreciate
thank you.
your delivery and your presentation and that. And before we wrap, what I'd really love is if you could let our listeners know how they can connect with you, Jack Coleman, where they can find you, what your website is, or if you just want to be reached on social media. So
Awesome. So I appreciate that. And I do my best. And I definitely had flack with the, not having the experience so much. And I actually, I had a hard time with that because I was just like, should I be saying these things? But also I started appreciating that maybe there's a reason why I didn't get deep in all of them. I've tasted all of them, but I haven't gotten deep into them. And I think it's because, like you said, when you're in it, you start getting biased. It starts becoming very polarized. And if I'm trying to promote this kind of balance, I kind of have to separate myself from it at some point, to some depth, so that I could see it objectively. Like, if I had kids and it was a bad experience, then I say no one should have kids. It's hard to come to this place of, well, everyone can have kids, but here's like a nice holistic way of having kids. And so it gets hard to balance when we're already leaning in one side without swinging to the other side. Because imagine leaning this way and then just trying to correct just to straight center. It's really hard because we're naturally going to tip. And most of the time, if we're really leaning to one side, we're really going to tip to the other until we come to this center point. So for me, I just skipped the whole really leaning, so I don't have to go like that and then take all the
so you just
time.
kind of swaying a little bit here.
Yeah, you just whispering,
Yes.
just a little breeze, and then it tips me and I go, oh shit, that's where that goes. And then you try something else out and I get tipped a little bit. And so for me, it doesn't really radically change. I mean, there's some things where it's not like everything, but there are a lot of the things that I talk about, I'm just more so getting a taste of it and I'm just feeling it out, in a meditation or something like that. Or basically I spend a lot of time alone so I could process these things, like, at any depth that I can have the time to or the energy to. So I really like that aspect of it. And I really like being able to show up for people in that way. So because I want to help a lot of people with consciousness in general. So that means I have to be familiar with a lot of states of consciousness. And it's really takes a lot of time to experience all the different things at
That's
that
true.
level.
It does. It's hard. It's hard for, so I'm a mom of five, and I
Ooh.
can just attest to that. It is hard to try and like evolve your consciousness, like be actively aware of it and engaging it as a parent. Because you're like, God damn it, I'm meditating. No, it's not really like that. But sometimes it is like that. You're like, I'll just wait for them to go
I'm
to
trying to
bed and
find
then I'll
peace.
try. Right. So, and so for me, I've really just shifted my schedule later just so I could have me time. But that's true. Um, we need to actually have time to be bored. and then to kind of like go, oh, I'm going to find myself to be entertaining somehow. And that's really how we
Yeah.
can kind of dig into it. Yeah.
Have the space. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's something I really try to, like promote people that, when they say I don't have time or something like that, or it's just really difficult because I have this going on. It's like, well, there are a lot of different ways we can move some pieces around. We can let go of some pieces. And so there are ways to achieve it. I'm just fortunate that I never signed up for those sort of things. I did only in smaller bits where I could leave if I felt like it wasn't quite working. Some people are deeper into it to where it takes a lot to leave, and just try to find themselves separately, let's say. So I'm just trying to show up and fill the gaps, for other people in that way, because I was fortunate enough. I'm not saying that makes us fortunate and unfortunate, but given what it is, to try and move through someone else's mind, I really feel like I personally need a lot of space, because if I'm moving through someone's mind and then another person's mind and another person's mind, I'm tripping, several times a week, and then,
And
still.
that can be exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So yeah, like, that's what I really like helping people with, and that's where it comes from. That's the space I come from. So, I openly admit that I don't experience a lot of this stuff at the depth that, people may want me to experience it, because they're like, you can't tell me, even if your words are true, you can't tell me just because you haven't experienced it. And I go, yeah, you're right. So then you probably want it from someone who has experienced it, but then they'll only be able to talk about that thing that they experienced, because it took 10, 20, 30 years to move through the beginning, meet, the middle, and end.
Yeah.
And then try to find some holistic perspective of it, when I'm telling you all the same words, but yeah, I just don't have the exact experience. So, we all have our qualifications and criteria for who we listen to, and that's totally fine. And so yeah, but either way, anyone that wants to try and shift a mindset, or just, see things from a different perspective, more unified, in my opinion, that's the ultimate, is balance, and try to find some holism in our breaks, because I'm not going to be like a support soundboard where I'm just like, yeah, you got it. Like, it's always agreeing. I want to try and bring things together. So if it's a difficult situation, I want to actually try to bring it together like Satan. I want to bring that in, not so that we can become just that one thing, but I feel like there's so much evolution once we unify these things that we've divided. I'm really passionate about that aspect of our minds. And it's hard to try and weave all those things together, put them together, and then create one new consciousness. There's a whole process in that, and to do it with, some things that are heavier. So this is what I really like massaging in, people that are seeking that. So they can easily find me on social media, very active on like Facebook and Instagram. If you message me, I'll easily respond. I have a website, Jack Coleman, JackColeman.live.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll put that on the show notes too.
Awesome. And so, yeah, you can book sessions, and also make these little personal resonance devices that help you retune, let's just say, consciousness to more natural rhythms. So that's really helped me. I hand make them. And yeah, I use them for personal tuning. And it's just really helped clean up my consciousness in ways that, yeah, it's really incredible. So
do you have a site for that?
It's on the JackColeman.live.
JackColeman.live.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're called quantum coils, and they're just handmade PEMF devices. But yeah, the way that we can use them, I started seeing some new avenues for it. So it's really cool. But generally speaking, we can just call it a resonance device, or PEMF device.
So you feel like vibrations from it?
Some people, it's really interesting. It's a subtle energy. So it's electromagnetism. PEMF is pulsed electromagnetic fields. And that's a quantum force, basically. It interacts with electrons. It's what moves them, between orbital shells and even between atoms. Our computers use it to transmit information. And most of the time, we don't really feel the effects of Wi-Fi or the signals. Wi-Fi is electromagnetic fields. And so we generally don't feel them, but they are interacting with us. But there are some people that, interestingly enough, they were super sensitive. They were like spiritualists, meditators. They love nature. and I would, set the thing up, but I hadn't turned it on yet. And they're like, "Ooh, I really feel the vibes and everything." And I was like, "I haven't turned it on yet." And then there are other people that are, let's just say, a little bit more numb. They watch TV, they eat, bad food, drink alcohol, don't meditate, don't really go out in nature. And I turned it on without telling them. And immediately, like, as soon as I flipped the switch, he goes, "Oh, what was that?" And I was just like,
Wow.
seriously? Yeah. So I can't really get a gauge because some of the sensitive people don't know when it's on or off. And, I've only had one of like the more, let's say, the numb person. And I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
He was probably the most accurate out of all the people, and he's like 65, and he was the most accurate for literally, I flipped the switch like that and he jumped out of his
Oh,
chair.
well, now I'm intrigued. I need to go to jackcoleman.live and check this out. So,
Yeah.
okay, well, we're wrapping up here, but I just want to say thank you
Awesome.
so much. Thank you for the patience. I know we were trying to get on here and do this months ago, but this
I'm
has
glad we
been,
could connect.
yeah, very enjoyable conversation, very enlightening. And I just really
Same with
appreciate
you.
your work and you, and thank you.
Thank you. And same with you. Yeah, this was awesome. I love this conversation. So much appreciation.
Thank you so much.